Athletes, especially fighters, are infamous for their off-the-ring disputes with management. For years, McGregor and many other prominent fighters, such as Khabib, Daniel Cormier, Jon Jones, were rewarded handsomely by the UFC thanks to its pay-per-view model. But now, many claim the deal has changed in structure and has left almost everyone on the verge of exploitation. And mind you, this is not the only episode where UFC and fighters are not aligned together. Not long ago, UFC agreed to pay $375 million to former fighters after years of legal tussles over compensation and competitive constraints. A settlement buried in history books, only to surface now after McGregor claimed his contract was void. Sounds like history repeating itself. Any evidence of the claim stays hidden, as control and suppression are just another day at the office in the UFC. The real question that now stands is, are UFC fighters on the verge of being exploited or cheated? Welcome to House of Sports. Hold on tight as we uncover unseen facts and stories about this long-standing issue. For the last 2 decades, the UFC operated on a simple model: pay-per-view, or PPV, where viewers paid for what they watched, and the fighters earned a percentage of it. Before we proceed, let us first understand how PPV operated. On every fight night, UFC sells the entire fight card as one single pay-per-view event. The total money received is then shared among all the participants depending on their popularity and skill level. PPV was not unique to the UFC. In fact, it was a staple of combat sports such as boxing and WWE. Fighters like Floyd Mayweather, Anthony Joshua, and Mike Tyson built their fortunes and careers around PPV events. It was the perfect model that honored greater risk with greater reward. If a fight sold out, the fighter's compensation and rewards were directly proportional. This led to fighters accepting restrictive contracts, NDAs, and sponsorships due to little to no negotiating power. At the top, this model created global superstars, but at every other level, it demanded blind acceptance of whatever was offered. Fighters still obliged because the upside was clear. Conor McGregor was a clear beneficiary of this system. McGregor alone is estimated to have earned $180 million through PPV, while other stars such as Khabib, Alistair Overeem, and more also secured life-changing payouts when events sold well. This led to no objections, as revenue was visible and linked to their performance. But due to efforts to modernize UFC viewership and engagement, a complete shift of contract terms has been observed, leaving all fighters in distress, and all hoping for renegotiations. Over the last few years, UFC gained a global spotlight, and after merging with WWE, both subsidiaries came under the parent company, TKO Holdings. To make revenue more predictable, management decided that event volatility does not guarantee long-term growth and is gradually changing how the matches are streamed. PPV started to slowly disappear as bundled deals and streaming platforms started gaining traction. For organizations and broadcasters, it meant consistent and stable revenue. But for the fighters, uncertainty, and event success driven by luck. While the PPV model rewarded fighters heavily at the top, it also had limitations. Unpredictable event sales, dependence on stars, piracy issues made long-term planning difficult for the organization. The PPV model that rewarded fighters generously was now fading away. Well, it is inevitable, given the limited upsides of PPV from an organizational standpoint. But what left fighters by themselves is that there was no room for renegotiation, even when their contracts were primarily written on a system of revenue distribution that was fading away. That's when tension began to surface, and McGregor and Gaethje decided to take a stand. Because business evolved at its natural pace, leaving behind fighters and their contractual terms.
McGregor is not just another fighter. He was the system's biggest success story, the poster boy of the PPV system that rewarded efforts proportionally. His statement about his contract being void immediately gained traction, triggering debates and discussions around UFC and their treatment of fighters. According to him, his contract was based on the PPV model. But the new shift has left him with no fairness or upside, as PPV was the foundation of his contract. This also put his much-anticipated White House fight in uncertainty, adding real stakes to the dispute beyond public statements. And soon, many joined his side and began speaking up. Justin Gaethje claimed that the new system does more harm than good.
He clearly admitted that he saw no improvement in personal earnings despite record-breaking revenues and new deals in the UFC world. But UFC management claims he never responded to their new terms. All this matters more than ever as fighters look for negotiations before the upcoming White House card. Fighters, with no union or collective bargaining power, face this structural issue that goes way beyond McGregor's or Gaethje's pockets. But as more events surfaced, it was now evident that UFC always put itself before the fighters. To everyone's surprise, this was not the first time UFC fighters felt sidelined. In fact, as similar past events resurfaced, everyone saw a clear pattern connecting the dots. Long before McGregor questioned his contract, many others had already filed full-fledged lawsuits. In 2014, former fighters filed an antitrust lawsuit, claiming the UFC used its dominance to keep fighter pay low and restrict their freedom to compete elsewhere. Fighters who competed between 2010 and 2017 claimed that they were powerless, with no real negotiating power, and fell prey to contracts that always benefited the organization first. What followed was a decade-long legal battle. In the end, UFC agreed to pay $375 million to settle the case. More than 97% of eligible fighters filed claims, with average payouts around $250,000. Several players received seven-figure settlements. And the UFC's reaction? They admitted no wrongdoing. But one thing was clear. Fighters do not believe this system was fair, since settlements of that scale don't get triggered without pressure. Soon after, another antitrust lawsuit was filed. This covered fighters from 2017 to the present. Same allegations, just different timelines. The case still has not reached a conclusion. More recently, two additional lawsuits have surfaced. One challenged clauses and terms that prevent fighters from suing collectively, while the other addressed UFC's broader dominance and monopoly across mixed martial arts that gives them a free hand to exploit fighters. All the events lead to the same issues: unfair contracts, compensation, and control. McGregor did not start the issue. He put the spotlight on something that was rooted deep in the sport. At this point, it becomes hard to view everything in isolation. The $375 million settlement was not an exception. Neither is the ongoing antitrust suit. Legal disputes and class action suits questioning their dominance are a result of the same factors, and all point towards recurring exploitation. But the UFC is growing better than ever. With a strong structure and lucrative deals, fighters are left to fend for themselves, surviving on whatever falls their way. PPV faded away, but contracts never changed. UFC is growing, but fighters are left behind. Concerns surface. Public interviews, debates, and lawsuits follow. Settlements are reached, and money is paid out. And then, the cycle begins again. So is UFC breaking the law? Let the courts decide that. Now back to the question. Is UFC cheating its fighters? Well, if the system truly worked for the fighters, we wouldn't be hearing about it. The UFC always had high stakes, produced the toughest fighters on the biggest stage, but as the sport keeps growing, transparency fails to catch up, and then arise the allegations and controversies. But who wins at the end? The fighters who put themselves on the line? Or the UFC, which gives these players a chance to make it big? Well, at this point, no one. This is House of Sports, and this story is far from over.